mean, think about how many, I work with an artist and it's me, the producer and the artist, and we're writing a full record and it's three people. That's who the creative, outlet, the team, that sort of that small group. And then, you work on a record that's at the next level and it's like, well, I don't have a say in anything
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
This has to be run through 12 different people before it gets approval. Not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's different.
Oh, all good, man. I appreciate you doing this today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
My name's Adam, and this is about you and your journey in music.
It's been a long one.
I love it. I love your skateboard deck over there.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a collaboration that they did with like Primitive. Zildjian did with Primitive, and they sent me one, and I was like on the fence about whether to put trucks on it and all that stuff.
Skate it or just
Yeah.
keep it. I would keep it exactly how you have it.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
amazing.
You're in Nashville?
Yeah, I'm in Nashville.
I was just there, I think last week or the week before. I think it was actually the week before. And I think we tried to line something up, but
Yeah, it got a little hectic. I mean, it was that last week of school for my kids, and then
oh yeah. Oh, you
so,
finished that early?
yeah, they finish early here for some reason. I mean,
My daughter's got till June 20th.
oh wow, yeah, I'm originally from San Diego. My family and I moved from San Diego, and that's how it usually was. I mean, you'd go through June and then start like Labor Day-ish, a little after Labor Day. And here it's like they're done in May.
That's awesome.
So,
I'm not going to tell her. She's like counting the days right now.
oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, they finish pretty early here. But then they go back in August. So I'm not sure why they do it that way, but
Florida
whatever.
does it the same way too. She has friends there, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you doing this. So first off, you were born and raised in Boston area, correct?
Never left. Just kind of stuck it out here.
Oh, are you still there now?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So, are you like what part? And tell me about your upbringing.
So I grew up in a town called West Roxbury, so Boston is made up of a bunch of different towns: Roxbury, Rosendale, Jamaica Plain, High Park. There's a bunch of different towns that make up the city of Boston.
Okay.
And so West Roxbury is just kind of like, it's suburb, but it's still, I mean, it's like less than 6 miles to get into actual city, but it is kind of like getting out of, Boston proper.
Sure.
So I grew up in West Roxbury, actually in West Roxbury now. So, started in West Roxbury, kind of moved to different parts of Boston, and then ended up back in West Roxbury.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
very cool. Is there a big, obviously Boston's a big music city, but like where you grew up, were kids starting bands, and were you able to play with neighbors and that sort of thing?
So Boston is interesting, because it's funny, because I had this conversation while I was in Nashville, and Nashville is a very, obviously a very robust music scene, and there's a lot of individual players trying to do something, in their career, whereas Boston
Sure.
very band, situated. So being a session musician here is tricky, because it's like having that conversation with people here, and it's gotten a lot better, but it would be like, I'd be like, I'm available for your band to, play a show or do a session, and here's my rate, and I can have that stuff done for you, ready to go. And they're like, how would I pay you? I just put something on Craigslist and start a band and have like an official member. And it's like, no, that's one way to go about it, but also I could learn your stuff in, a day, and then be ready to play, and that it'll cost you this kind of money. So that conversation was always tricky, because it's not a session town.
Sure.
But it's a great band town, and I grew up playing in bands since I was 17 or 18 years old. And so my idea was to play in as many bands as possible. But it's one of those markets that's really, really, like, the local music scene here is like essential to bringing such visibility to, the city. And now it's become this market that international, national touring bands. They can't miss this market because
Right.
it's getting extremely vital for them to be here, because there's so many college students here. I mean, within like a 4-mile radius, there's 400,000 college students.
And you Berkeley's there too.
And
So.
that's where I work.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So we'll get into that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's interesting. Well, I'm going to ask you that question later because
Okay.
it's not, but I'm going to go linear here. So like, so how do you start in music? Like, do you come from an artistic musical household at all?
So I come from an artistic household. My dad is a sculptor and an
Oh,
architect.
wow.
My mom was a photographer and worked in the art department at Northeastern. And my brother is a sculptor and a metal fabricator. So we all
Wow.
sort of chose, a different medium. And that was huge for me because it allowed me to sort of understand the value of art, the value of having this outlet, creative outlet. And I just picked music. And the cool thing about my family is they're all very supportive, even if they don't know too much about, you know, the music that I play. They take the time to, I don't think up until like the pandemic, I don't think my mom ever missed a show. And I was
Wow.
playing, I could be upwards of 100 shows a year kind of thing. So um, it was very important for me. And the cool thing that my dad also said was, don't. No, he didn't say don't, but he was heavy on the like, this should be something that's always important and enjoyable in your life. So don't make it don't make it a career, but don't rely on it to make money, because it's going to be inconsistent. There's
Hmm.
going to be times where it does very well, and there's going to be times where it's going to be slow. So always have it, but always have sort of something else going on, over here, that you can rely on financially. And so I think that mindset, even though my music career took off and got to a point where I could make it a full-time job, um,
Hmm.
I still always have these, stable foundation jobs. And working at Berklee is certainly kind of blends the two things together. But I think that's why I've enjoyed it for so long, is that I never had that pressure, that financial pressure, be like, I have to play, I have to take as many gigs as I possibly can in order to pay rent. And now I can take gigs that may not have money to start with, but I believe in them, or I think it's a really cool opportunity, and I can take it without being like, hey, we'll figure something out down the road, kind of thing. So
Hmm.
having that flexibility has been really important.
Yeah, that's awesome because a lot of people, I mean, even in my own household, like it was get a job, go to college, get a job at a company that you can hopefully die at and, get the 401k and all the other things that go along with it. And to have such a supportive family, and especially an artistic family where, you know, your mom and dad are both in the arts, they understand not only the importance of it, but how this is a lucrative career. And yeah, sure, you should have something else to fall back on. Not really fall back on. In your case, it's like, yeah, I teach at Berklee, which is a music school, and I'm still doing exactly what I, want to do and love
Yeah, and
doing.
also, as you get older, you realize the value of having those uh sort of benefits. That, I have a daughter, so obviously that needs to be priorities that she's, fully taken care of. And
Sure.
paying out of pocket for medical is sometimes not, the most
Yeah.
easily accessible thing to do. And the other thing that's kind of cool is uh, the music thing for me has always been more of like a benefit for me, sort of from a emotional and mental standpoint. It's always something that I would do regardless if it was, bringing in, a certain amount of money. And I think by looking at it that way, it it just is this piece of my life that's really essential to my growth, to the opportunities, to being able to travel, to be able to meet and connect with people and do something creative. And then there's this financial piece that's sort of like, oh, well, this is another benefit to it, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, yeah, that was a big. My dad instilled that into me because he's been doing sculptures for 70 years now, and
Wow.
still, when he retired, it was like, well, now I get to do this, full time. And I don't know if anybody's even like, he doesn't care if anybody sees his art. It's just a part of his, life enjoyment kind of
Uh-huh.
thing. And I think having that as a mentality sort of allowed me to, the longevity of this career is, endless.
Hmm. Yeah, you're doing what you love to do. With that, like, how do you get into playing drums? Like, was that the first instrument you learned, or like, where did you gravitate towards that early on?
So I started with piano, and there was it was a long time ago. I started with piano. I think the piano teacher actually said to my parents, like, this doesn't feel like a good fit, for him. I don't know, couldn't sit still, or, something like that. So he recommended something more body, movement, you know, uh, so
Athletic.
yeah, something to get his inability to sit still out. Um, so my parents had like a snare drum, or they had a snare drum, or a neighbor had a snare drum or something like that, and a cymbal, no stand or anything. And so my brother, it was really funny. This is how my family would think. My dad's like, oh, well, here's a dowel, like a wooden dowel,
Mhm.
and your brother's gonna sit here next to you, and he's going to hold the dowel, and we're going to put this snare on some stand that he built, and he made me two drumsticks out of other dowels that he had. And I would just sit there and I would play the cymbal and the snare, and it was an immediate connection. Later in life I sort of figured out that, the psychological, reasoning, but why I enjoyed it was because I like things that are repetitive. I like things that are very cyclical, patterns, they're all very calming,
Mhm.
for me. And that's kind of what drums are. It's like my right hand is doing this thing, my left hand is doing this thing, my foot is doing this thing, and they all sort of work together in some sort of symmetry. And that to me is very calming. So it was like the perfect instrument, and
Yeah.
and I think it has to do with patterns. I think, things that repeat were really, really cool to me. And I think when I see the piano, or do, see the guitar, even if I hop on a piano in a studio, or if I'm waiting for someone and there's, obviously I like at Berklee, I'll sit down and I'll play things that are very repetitive. They're probably boring to other people, but for me, hearing those things sort of, work in some symmetrical pattern is very, um it's hits some part of my brain that's really appealing.
Yeah. Did you ever get into like, beat production as far as like on a computer, or you just did it all by just because I'm just thinking like patterns and repetitive,
Of
being
course.
able to drop loops and kind of do
So
that sort
I
of
do
thing.
that now. I work with a
Oh, you do?
producer who's a beat maker, and we do this, on a daily basis. And of course, with, everything can be done on the computer now. So this is now a big integral part of my, playing as a drummer, is to create these things in the box. But uh, the the funny thing is, I actually learned to play drums. Um, by using my brother's, I used to take my brother's hip hop cassettes, which from the late 80s, early 90s, because that's about the time that I was learning to play. And the reason that was such a big deal for me is hip hop beats were the beats never changed. They were sort of the foundation of the song for the MCs to rhyme, or do
Right, right.
their raps over. And what I tell people when I do teaching is it was a great way to learn to play drums, because what happens is you start off the song, you're trying to lock in with the beat, you're trying to get that beat going, and you have, 3 minutes to kind of get to the end of the song, and you know that it's not going to change. So, like, I just got to keep working on this throughout the song. And by the end, now you're playing along with the song. And what I found is that when somebody's taking an instrument, the thing that would get them frustrated and not want to do it is not being able to play along with something. So if you have a song that has one verse that goes some way, then there's something else that happens on the chorus, then there's a bridge section, and then there's this other chorus, and then you don't have, your brain doesn't have time to process those many changes when you're just getting started. And for me, hip hop was perfect because I knew this is the beat. I'm going to learn this beat and it doesn't change. And I'm going to play this song and I'm going to feel good at the end of this. Like, wow, I'm playing the drums along with, this artist kind of thing. And so hip hop was the greatest way for me to learn how to get limb independence, how to, feel confident at the end of the song. And years later, I realized I make a lot of hip hop records as a session musician now, and having that pocket, having that ability to groove along with a song and have really strong sense of like beats and groove has been great as a session musician, because as a studio musician, the flamboyant, overplaying drum fills and all that stuff isn't necessary when you're making records, and a lot of producers don't want to deal with that. So
Yeah.
it actually works out great because I'm a very minimalist drummer and end up playing on a lot of records. And I think that has to do with the fact that I learned to play with these hip hop records.
Interesting. Yeah, because even hip hop drums, they kind of translate into a lot of different styles of music still, right? I mean,
Pop
aren't there?
country now.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of music utilizes those hip hop like style of drum beats.
Yeah. And this is the 50th year of the birth of hip hop this year. So that's pretty cool.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I've my son is just turned 7. We
Oh,
got
my
him a
daughter too.
oh wow, cool.
Yeah.
So he got a drum set right when COVID started. We got him, but he got him electric kit so he didn't drive the neighbors up the wall. But a buddy of mine's a drummer. He's not really. I mean, he plays in a bunch of different bands. Like he's like kind of not like a studio guy, but he's like a touring guy.
Yeah.
So he was showing me. We got him some electric kick, but it has like a real kick, it has and not just like a trigger kick.
Yeah.
So he's been learning. I'm just curious for my own selfish questions. With the hip hop songs, like what were you learning to? Like what were the artists early on or songs early on that you were playing? Because I feel like he's in that position now where he knows like 6 or 7 beats, but it's like he plays it for a little bit and then he just like is done with it, but he's not playing along to anything.
Yeah, so I mean the bands that I grew up, the late 80s, 90s are hip hop groups were like, Brand Nubian, like Grand Puba, EPMD,
Oh,
Black
sure.
Sheep, Gangstar, that was who was, out at the time that I was playing. So, he's 7, so I'm sure the lyrics, may or may not be, the greatest,
Yeah, well, I'll find a clean version of some Gangstar because I loved those records growing up, and EPMD, to be honest.
So a lot of that stuff, a lot of those beats which have been sampled, a million times, you have
Yeah.
like, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest,
Oh
all
yeah.
these things. I mean, you could listen. I mean, some of the beats were complicated, but for the most part, you could almost get through them with kick and snare. You don't even have to incorporate the hi-hat, just yet. So I would say just listen. You find like a really great old Tribe Called Quest song, and just play it for him and listen. I mean, the patterns they're very like
Distinct, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
they're like the ones that you remember for like your entire like childhood and into your like formative years. And you can kind of, the cool thing about it is even if you're not hitting it, if you're trying to play like Enter Sandman or something, when you're first getting started and you're not playing it right, it may not sound good, but like
Yeah.
for hip hop stuff, just let that record play, could hit the kick a few times. You could kind of just come in with the snare. You could just do hi-hat, because a lot of those samples are just that. They're like broken down kits where it's like the kick, the snare, and the hi-hat. And a lot of the records I do now are just kick, snare, hi-hat. So,
Interesting.
I mean, you look at what Nate Smith can do with just those pieces. It's like, it's mind-blowing, the creativity that you can have when you've broken down everything into a minimalist sort of format. I think Steve Gadd said, it was my favorite line was, fills get the thrills, but grooves pay the bills, and
Oh yeah.
that's it. But Yeah, listen, yeah, I mean, go down a rabbit hole, listen to old 80s and 90s hip hop, even Sugar Hill Gang. I mean, those beats were, it wasn't about the beat, even though the beat became such a like a synonymous with those records, but
Yeah.
it was more about the lyrics. It was more about what the artist was saying. And it was just this thing that kind of, laid underneath to kind of drive the song along. And that was really great for me to play to those because, they're head boppers.
Right. Yeah, I love that you said just that you could keep playing along because they are repetitive. I mean, the one beat will go 3 minutes, or at
Yeah.
least the drums will go through. So
I
then you
mean,
could just jump in at any time, like, okay, I screwed up here. Okay, we'll start again.
well, and being the dad of a 7-year-old, I mean, the attention span is very small. So
Yeah.
when you're trying to like learn an instrument, if you don't feel like you're good at it, which is, like what my daughter, says to me, she's like, I'm not good at this. And then it's like, it
They're
takes a
done with
while
it.
for them, let's try again, let's try again.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it was like, okay, I got 3 minutes to get through this. And it's not like I'm listening to something that is like, oh, this is miserable. Like I love the music. So it was like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to mess up. And then by the end, you get this like eureka moment where you're just like, holy crap, I'm playing along to this song. You got your headphones on, so I'm sure the people who aren't listening to the music along with you are probably like, what in the world is
You're
going on?
right.
But to you, you're in this like little world, and that's what I would do. And that's why I have such a undeniable like love for hip hop, because that's what kind of got me to actually enjoy this instrument.
That's awesome. And so once you learn, you said you're about 10 or so when you were
I
playing?
was about well, I started probably 8 or 9, but around 10 years old was when I was like, I'm gonna play drums for the rest of my life. This is what I
Okay.
want to do.
And did you join like did you play percussion in like the school orchestra or band or anything, like jazz
Um,
band maybe in school?
no jazz band. I definitely was in like the high school, middle school like band program, but I I had a terrible time with like structured music situations.
Mhm.
It's the same thing. I got my master's in photography. I went to school for like photography and got my master's in photography. And it took me a long time to enjoy taking photos after going to school
Oh, sure.
do it, because it was just like, I just want to take pictures. I don't want assignments, or I don't want to do it this way. I just like taking photos. So then it took me a while to come back and be like, oh, I do really enjoy um, playing music. I mean, I really do enjoy taking photos. And the same thing with music, it was like it needed to be something that I kind of did on my own sort of
Mhm.
enjoyment. But I did do it in school just because it was like, you know, that's what I did. But
Yeah. There's a
sports
class
was
you could
such
just
a
play
good,
drums at.
yeah. And then I would go home and play, the stuff that I wanted to play.
Right, right. So did you play in bands and all that when you were in middle school, high school?
Not middle school, the funny thing was is sports were as equal a big part of my life too. So, I wanted to be a professional soccer player as well,
Okay.
so soccer did take a lot of time. I ended up playing soccer in Europe for a little bit.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think it wasn't until probably end of high school, 11th, 12th grade, that I was like, all right, I got to make a choice here. It's going to be music. And then I would start, playing in bands around, 16, 17, 18, garage type stuff. And then throughout college, I kind of did it, off to the side a little bit. I didn't, not a lot of, it's funny, a lot of kids in college that I'm still friends with were like, bro, I didn't know you even played like music, because it was this kind of thing that I would do on my own, where like I didn't invite people to my shows. I didn't do anything. It was just this thing that I really liked doing. And then towards the end of college, it was like, all right, I'm gonna try to make a go at this. And once I graduated, it was like full on, I'm gonna be in 15 bands at the same time.
Okay. So that's where it started. You just started playing in a bunch of bands, and was it in hopes that, okay, one of these, because was your goal to be a session musician, or was it like, I'm going to be in a band and we're going to tour the world? And, or, I mean, obviously you've done those things, but I mean, in the sense of you were saying earlier how people ask you to be like a member of the band, and you're like, well, no, here's my rate, and I'll play some shows and I can learn your songs real quick, or I can go to the studio and do that. But you probably had to start outside of that world.
So from I didn't just because I was here, I didn't sort of fully understand like, oh, you can go off on your own and make a living and make a career just being this single entity, this piece to the puzzle kind of thing.
Hmm.
So exactly what you said, which was I I'm going to join as many bands as I can, and one of them is going to take off, and then I'm going to have my dream of touring the world and playing in all in front of all these people and selling millions of records.
Hmm.
Well, that didn't happen, and that was like from 18 to 30 of playing in every band that existed in Boston. And to be honest with you, I probably have either played, recorded, sat in, or did some sort of collaboration with a good majority of the bands that come out of the city. So it wasn't until about I was around 30 where I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make a run at kind of just telling people that I'm on my own kind of thing. And by that point, just because of the size of the city and the music scene is a very like intimate, even though it's big, it's a very intimate sort of thing. Everybody sort of knows everybody,
Hmm.
kind of thing. At that point, everybody already sort of did know who I was, and for the most part, everyone was like, "Wow, this guy plays with literally everybody in the city of Boston." Um, so it wasn't such a difficult transition to go, hey, I'm not gonna be an official member of anybody's band anymore. I'm just gonna be available for whoever needs me, and then I'm gonna keep kind of harping on the fact that like I'm available for anybody's project. But I was kind of already doing that just for the fact that I was always around, and people like, hey, Jonathan from so and so's band, can you play on my record, or can you sit in with me, kind of thing. Which is what this city does. Is a lot of people who kind of bounce around just because of they know somebody and this band needs something, but they don't necessarily call themselves session musicians. They just like,
Hmm.
oh, I play music kind of thing. So, and it always stayed within this like local, level. I mean, the bands are successful, but they're successful on a local level. Um,
Right.
and so for me, it was like, well, if I'm going to be, you know, taken seriously on a national, international session level, I got to reach outside of the city. So I was already playing with people from New York. I was already playing with people who had international sort of recognition. So it was easy for me to kind of plug and play. I was getting flown out to LA to do sessions for somebody who was big enough to be flown out to LA, play there. I was going down to Nashville to play with some, one-offs down there kind of thing. So that gradually gave my name more sort of a national, you know, recognition. And then the touring with the bigger bands allowed me to go to Europe and go overseas, or go all across this country, go to Canada and do all that stuff too. So it just kind of built, but a lot of it built after I had sort of taken myself out of the band sort of equation. And then I'm an official member of one band now, and that band's called Still Gold. It's a hip hop group from Boston. And that producer, who's the producer for that band, the guitar player in that band, he's the one that I collaborate on a lot of my music with. So we have a like sort of a collaboration team in which I bring him artists, he brings me artists, and we do a lot of records together. So 80% of my session studio work comes from the fact that he's working with a ton of artists, I'm working with a ton of artists, and we kind of write songs for these artists, between me and him.
Oh, wow, okay. And, like, what was kind of the first, or was there a moment, or was it more of a gradual thing, like, that did something happen, or, like, did you get to play with an artist or something that you're like, "Whoa," like, "Okay, this is kind of the next level." Like, I was able to kinda jump up from being more of a localized guy that's kinda being in all these bands to now my name's getting recognition and I'm doing like, was there a stepping stone there, or was it just the amount of people you were playing with at the
Yeah,
time? And
I think the greatest thing about this industry that we work in is word of mouth just gets passed on. If you play with an artist, in Boston, chances are they know an artist that is from another city who can, who needs, potentially drum work or something like that. But also, there are obviously like local level bands from Boston, but there are also a ton of bands and artists here who are on an international level who just kind of stuck it out. I mean, I was playing with this one woman. She was sort of a rock luminary from the 70s and 80s. Her name was Talia Zedek, and so she would take us over to Europe, a bunch, because she was actually bigger in Europe. I play with this woman in New York whose name is Holly Miranda, and Holly Miranda has a huge international following. And so we would do her record in New York, I mean in LA. So it's like you don't have to go so far just to find an artist who has, jumped, from the local to more of a national and international level. And by that time, I was already playing with these people. And then, with the advancement of online music, a lot of people are now successful all over the place because their music is now all over the place. So
Mhm.
um it's tricky because it's like, of course, when you think of huge artists and you think of people that everybody knows, you're thinking LA, you're thinking, Nashville, you're thinking New York to an extent. But a lot of those records are not, there's not a lot of humans working on those records, like physically working on those records as a producer and songwriter, and they're doing it from a small production suite. And then eventually, when they're ready to tour, they put together, a band, for some sort of arrangement,
Mhm.
opportunities. And that group is very small. Those megastars are using a very small number of players. And um once it's not easy to get, sort of into those inner circles. And it's not that I'm like envious of that, because what ends up happening is I have friends who play with big pop stars, and that's awesome, but that's all they end up having time for. They
Mhm.
can only do this one thing for 2, 3, 4 months at a time, and then they come back and they have to scramble to get other work. Whereas for me, I kind of figured out this thing where it's like I can be in the studio 5 days a week and I can go play shows at night. So, and I get to work with hundreds of artists, at any given point, and they're working with one, and they're not even doing the creative, not that they're not doing the creative part of it. They're doing this one aspect of it. They don't get to be a part of maybe the studio stuff, because that's a whole nother group of players that are doing that stuff. So
Mhm.
they get this one side of it, whereas what I'm doing is I get to work on the record, and then from there I get to work with the artist and do some touring with the artist, kind of thing. So I feel like my mentality isn't necessarily I want to play with the biggest artists in the world, which I do. I kind of like the fact that I do something different every single day, and it involves me getting to play the drums. And yeah, of course I would like to put huge name artists on my resume, but I think, it kind of goes, in a progression. My name every year gets passed along to more and more people. I know all the people that are in those inner circles at the top, and if an opportunity arises, they know, oh, let's do that. Jonathan's, worthy of those opportunities. But if that's like all you are hoping for, you're kind of missing, the process. You're kind of missing all of these opportunities down here that are just as exciting and just as you know formative for me, to be able to work with an artist that nobody knows yet, and to be like, wow, you worked on that record that became huge, but nobody
Right.
knew who this person was, to begin with. That's exciting to me. um so I
Yeah,
feel like
100%. I 100% agree with that. I was on the radio for a long time before this podcast kind of took it over full time. And it was cool to be a part of that, like finding a band or being able to be the first person to play a band, and then which was the case a lot of times, but then only a very small fraction of them get to like having multiple hits, and it's like so cool to kind of be a part of the journey, and then it gets big and you're like, oh wow, like this person is now at this level or whatever.
I mean, think about how many, I work with an artist, and it's me, the producer, and the artist, and we're writing a full record, and it's three people. That's who the creative, outlet, the team, that sort of that small group. And then, you work on a record that's at the next level, and it's like, well, I don't have a say in anything
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
This has to be run through 12 different people before it gets approval. Not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's different.
Mhm.
And I like all aspects of it. I love to play in front of 10,000 people one night and actually play in front of 7 people the next night, because it's different. It keeps it exciting.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's what makes a really robust music career. When I look back on my career, I'm going to go, I did so many different things and I loved all of it. Some of it was really difficult, some of it was uncomfortable, some of it was amazing. And that's kind of like what my dad said to me. Is like, it's so funny to see when in their art studio, the first piece that he ever made versus the most recent piece that he ever made, and what that journey was like getting to that point. Same thing with me. I listened to the first record I ever recorded, and then the most recent one, be like, man, my progression has been consistent, but like I've watched myself grow as an artist.
Yeah, yeah, and it was interesting what you said about just being a touring musician, because then, yeah, if you're a touring musician for a big artist, right, how often are they actually touring? And then you're not on the record, and the record or the you're not yeah, you're not physically on the recorded piece of music. You're just having to play what was already done. Like, okay, you're gonna play these are how these 15 songs go, and just play them as we've laid it down. And it's like, "Oh,
Yeah,
okay." And then you're just doing your thing. You're almost yeah, it's more of like a
but it's cool.
mechanical
I
piece,
mean,
which
you
is
got
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the grass is always going to be greener. Like I have a friend who's plays for a music director for a major pop star, and he looks at me and he goes, I want everything that you're doing. And I'm like, how many times have you met like the last like 5 presidents because you played at the White House so many times? And it's like, yeah, but we have that conversation, and I think that really helps you get in the mindset like, wow, this thing that I want, I want it, I'm going to go after it. And then he's like, I had that, but I want what you're doing, because you're part of a creative process that I'm not a
Mhm.
part of, like.
Right.
And so, and that's what I think you need a balance of everything. I think when you talk about a legacy of your music career, he can say, yes, I've played in front of tens of millions and millions of people in places and venues that like people dream about. And he's like, but I've played on maybe four records in my career that aren't that person's records. They're like some
Right.
other people that asked me to do it. Whereas I played on thousands of records, but I haven't played at the White House, and I haven't played at, the Super Bowl or something like that. So in my mind, and this has always been something interesting, when somebody asked me, this is the main question, would you rather be a touring musician, or would you rather be a studio rat kind
Yeah.
of thing? And I'm always like, well, I want both. And I want both, but I'm always going to lean towards studio. And the reason is my family, my dad, my brother, and my mom, they all have physical representations of their work. My mom can hang her painting on the wall. My brother's sculptures are all there for you to see. He can look back at a physical representation of how his career was through the years that he did it. For me, that's records. Those are albums that I've played on. That's my legacy. All the albums that I played on. A lot of people who are just touring musicians, they're like, yeah, they're memories, they're like, yeah, I played here and I played here and I played in front of this amount of people and it was great, but that kind of existed and then it didn't exist
Mhm.
anymore. You did it, if you were present for it, and then you moved on to something else. So I always feel like if I want to look back and look at my career, I want recordings, I want like albums, I want vinyl of stuff that I've played on, because then it's like, okay, this is my career as a physical manifestation. And then I want the experience of being like, yeah, I loved looking out at a sea of people, and playing, this great night. I'll always remember that night, but unless somebody took a picture of it,
Right, right.
it was a personal memory kind of thing.
Instead of like, yeah, here's the actual, it's a literal like stamp of that time of your life. Like,
Exactly.
okay, I can
Yeah.
go back and this was in 2005 and I can remember here's the record that I played on.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. Is it hard to juggle? I mean, that many songs and that many artists and probably that many genres and styles of music. Like if somebody that you've played with maybe 3 or 4 years ago goes, hey, like I want you to come back and do this. Is it all just like you could just re-listen to it and go, oh, okay, this is what I did, or this is the style? Or do you, I mean, I guess my question is like having to know that many songs and having that many people to play with, does that get like confusing, or is it hard to kind of remember like, oh yeah, I did this on this or this on this?
Yeah, there are times. I mean, there are times where it certainly have to go back through old notebooks, or I certainly do my due diligence and practice on my own to relearn stuff. But there are certainly times where like I couldn't tell you, I go back and listen to a record, be like, I played on that, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it's like if I'm playing stuff that I played on, or I'm playing with artists, generally when I listen to it, I'm gonna know right away if I'm gonna be able to do it. There's certainly times where somebody's giving me music and I'm like, I'm not the right drummer, for
Mhm.
that stuff, and it's gonna take me way too long to learn this by the time that you need it. You have to be honest with that. They're hiring, you want to put forth the best, your best stuff for them. Um, Also, my drum parts, for the most part, if I ever worked on a record, aren't super complicated, anything like that. So if I re-listen to a record, it's more about remembering where these transitions happen and how the structure of the song goes. But back when I was in my 30s, and I was like, I'm gonna play with everybody on everything, I'm not gonna say no to everything. There were 5 to 8, 7 years in which I had piles and piles and piles of notebooks, and I would literally go to a show, and all the pictures of me with my head, everything's over here, and I'm just reading notes that I had
Oh,
written notes down,
wow, yeah.
because I had no idea where they, what how the song sounded or anything
Oh,
like that.
that's funny.
So
So you'd actually write out the notes of the songs. Okay, like, oh, this is the first song on the set list, and then you'd have the actual like
my my
notes written out.
process is so, probably so backwards compared to, like, I have friends who can write like a 12 song set list and they can do it all on one page,
Oh
their
wow.
notes kind of thing. For me, and this is actually how it was when I was in school. In order for me to remember something, I have to write the whole thing out. It's sort of like if I write it down, it's going into my brain,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. So a lot of my like notebooks would, or songs that I didn't know, would be like, okay, vocalist starts by saying, quote, these words. That's when the drums come in. The drums should sound like a doo-wop pattern in a slow to medium tempo. Don't forget to crash, before it was like a narrative of the song, and that's how I would remember it. And if you got to think, if I was doing 10 artists in a week, of all songs that I didn't sort of know what was happening in these songs, this is a lot of remembering. And
Hmm.
so, but in turn, what it ended up doing for me, it certainly didn't bring in huge sums of money, but what it did was it prepared me to be able to handle any situation that was thrown at me on stage, and be able to walk into most situations with confidence that, yeah, we'll get through it. And also, it's not supposed to be perfect. That's part of what playing music is. I don't we kind of live in industry now in which perfection is what everybody, that's what the bar is. If this song isn't perfect, if there's any sort of clams or any sort of like nuances in the song, like it's not worthy of people's attention. And that, I don't come from that
Yeah,
time
me
period.
either. I
So
love a little grit and a little bit
I
of
mean, if can you imagine if you heard like,
imperfections.
if you heard flawless Rolling Stone songs, like
Yeah.
like it sounds like robots are playing this.
Hmm.
Um, so I really do sort of play with artists who still really do appreciate the human imperfection and the fact that this is rock and roll and it's supposed to be, you're supposed to feel the energy and feel the the emotion and feel that stage presence. You're not supposed to, otherwise we just go up there and hit play on the record
Hmm.
and just everybody sit around and have a beer, while the,
Right, right.
so
Yeah, in radio we because I felt the same way. Like you'd hear certain stations and it was so robotic, and it was everything had to be was perfect sounding because it was all just pre-recorded and pre-produced. And we used to
yeah,
call it like audio wallpaper. Like you turn a station on and you're like you could predict what the person was going to say because it was so, there was such a formula to, okay, you say this, and then get out, and you'd record it so it fit perfectly. And there was something cool about kind of hearing somebody screw up, and you're like, it's just like, oh, that's a human being back there.
exactly. Remember that
Yeah.
part of it, I mean,
Yeah.
this whole AI stuff is really sort of confusing to me because it's like, yeah, I see the cool factor in it, but like, what, it's not, it's a creative for me to tell the computer it what I want for the final product. I mean,
Yeah.
I think people are using AI now for what you would expect them to use it for. Like, oh, I'll never get to be on a rap song with Jay-Z, so I might as well just mimic his voice and put it on here.
Right.
Okay, you're showing the power of a computer, but is it creative? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Why don't you maybe work really hard and get yourself to a point where you actually could be on a song with Jay-Z instead of having like lawyers now come to you and be like, you can't use this dude's voice.
Right.
Like,
Sure, the
like,
computer made it, but yeah, this
yeah,
is
now you're in trouble.
right.
So
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I just have a couple more questions for you. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for doing
yeah,
this. You did have the opportunity. You played with Seth Meyers, right? You played on his band in his band for his late night show.
yeah,
What was that like?
that was unbelievable. So I have this conversation a lot with Berklee students and stuff like that. Is like, how how do you how do I get my career going? How do
Hmm.
what, I can play this instrument now, what? And I was like, set goals for yourself because it keeps you hungry as you're kind of moving along in this career. I made a goals list. I have it in my pocket. I made it when I was like 12 years old. And I've literally spent my entire career going to check off boxes. Now, every time I check off a box, I add another three. So it's like my 12-year-old goals versus my 42-year-old goals are very, very different. But what it allowed me to do was always stay hungry and always shoot to try and achieve something, in my career. And so Seth Meyers, that was like as soon as that show came out and I saw that they started to use drummers, bringing guest drummers, I was like, I want to do that. And at that point, I was nowhere even remotely on anybody's radar to be able to be considered for that opportunity. And so it was my goal. I didn't put a timetable on it. There was no, I have to do this by this time. I just said, I'm going to do this. I put it on my list and I went for it. And it took 7 years. And I, out of the blue, got a call. Hey, can you do this show? And it was like, this is what I'm talking about. This is the problem with, and I'm not saying this a bad way, but the problem with this generation, the younger generation, is the immediate gratification. I do not want this to take too long before I have the opportunity. So what I try to tell these kids is, okay, that's fine. What happens if you said you want to play in front of 80,000 people? That's your goal. That's a great goal to have. How long until you want that to happen? Well, if it doesn't happen in a year, I'm gonna quit because it's stupid. I'm not gonna waste more time trying to go for this. Okay, but what happens if it happened in a year and a week? But you gave up after a year. and it was going to happen the next week. You were going to get that opportunity. It's like you put a timetable on something like, I have to wait that long for this opportunity to happen. It's like, yes, but no, because what you do is you put 200 fishing poles in the water. This is my Seth Meyers one over here. I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to put another 190 fishing poles in the water. And as things happen, I'm going to, go over, focus on this one. This one's getting nibbles. I'm going to work on this one. Let this one sit. And when it starts getting nibbles, then you come back over here and you work on this way. That way, you're never just hoping for this one thing. It'll happen. Just let it happen when it's going to happen. Work on this other stuff. Be present for these other things, because that was the most challenging gig I've ever had in my entire life. And had all of these other things not happened, there's no way I would have been prepared to perform and get through those shows, because it was a very like anxious style of playing drums. You know what I mean? There's a lot going on those shows, but I was able to step into that and be like, all right, we're going to navigate our way through this, and we're going to get through it, and it's going to be great, and I'm going to experience it, and it's going to be a challenge. But I needed all of this other stuff to happen. I needed to be thrown into the wolves over here in order for that to be okay, because this was a lot of eyes watching you at the time. So I think it was amazing, and it was wonderful, and I loved it, and I'm so happy that I did it. And it's exactly what I try to tell these kids is just set goals for yourself and go after them, and set lots of goals and go after them, because at the end of the day, you're the only person you need to really like have your approval is yourself, and you'll feel like so grateful when you accomplish different things. And that has a lot to do with you setting your expectations really high and challenging yourself to go after things. And at the end of the day, if you're bored, or things aren't happening fast enough in your industry or in your music career, then it's probably not the right field for you to work in, because there are really no guarantees in this. And I still have endless boxes that I made when I was 12 years old that I still have not checked off.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you again. You just pretty much answered my last question, which is if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
That's the one. Set goals.
Set goals. I love that. Thank you again so much, Jonathan, for doing this. I appreciate your time today, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Bringing it backward.